This is the story of Thomas Elliot Varden and his wife, Anna Celine Varden. They had been married for 9 years when the quality of their silences began to change. What had once been the comfortable quiet of two people who understood each other became something denser, something that required effort to sit inside. Thomas was a methodical man, an engineer by training, careful and precise, and he had built their life with the same patient attention he gave to blueprints, room by room, year by year, with the belief that solid foundations were enough to hold a structure upright. Anna was different. She had always needed something he could not quite name, something that moved, that shimmered, that made her feel not just secure but seen. And for years she'd convinced herself that security was the same thing. It wasn't. And the distance between those two needs, small as a hairline fracture, had been quietly widening for a long time before either of them admitted it was there. The coffee Thomas made each morning was always too strong. Anna had told him this 100 times, gently at first, then with a kind of exhausted humor, and he had adjusted the ratio marginally, then forgotten the adjustment, and they had settled into a quiet routine where she poured half of it down the drain and topped the mug with hot water from the kettle before he noticed. It was a small deception, and she told herself it was kindness. Mornings in their house on Alderton Street had a particular texture. Thomas left at 7:15, his shirt already tucked, his keys already in his hand, his mind already on whatever problem waited for him at the firm. He kissed her cheek at the door. Every morning, without fail, the same cheek, the same brief pressure of his lips. And then he was gone, and Anna stood in the kitchen in her robe listening to the sound of his car backing down the drive. She was 36. She taught art history at a community college 2 days a week and spent the others doing research for a book she had been writing for 4 years. A book about how the pre-Raphaelites understood grief through color. It was good work, careful work, and she was proud of it in a quiet way that she rarely spoke about, partly because Thomas listened with genuine attention and asked thoughtful follow-up questions, and she had come to find this quality in him almost unbearable. His attention was so correct. It had the texture of homework. She hated herself for thinking it. They had no children. This was a choice they had made together in their early 30s and revisited in conversations that grew shorter each year, until the topic had simply stopped coming up, like a bird that no longer returns to a particular branch. It was in October that she first mentioned her colleague, Daniel Foss, a visiting lecturer in the art department. She brought him up casually. The new visiting lecturer is actually interesting, which is rare. And Thomas had nodded and asked what he taught. And she'd said mixed media and installation work. And Thomas had made a face that wasn't dismissive but was something adjacent to it. The face of a man who found such things slightly impractical. Anna noticed. She registered the small narrowing of his attention and said nothing. Daniel Foss was 41, broad-shouldered and untidy in the way of men who have decided that carelessness is a personality. He spoke about art with the kind of undisguised hunger that made his students lean forward, and he had a habit of looking at people, really looking, that Anna told herself was simply characteristic of visual artists. He had asked her in the faculty lounge what her book was actually about. Not the subject, he said. What it was about. She had found herself talking for 20 minutes. She didn't tell Thomas this part. November arrived and the evenings grew dark early. Thomas had been given a complicated infrastructure project that kept him at the office until 8, sometimes 9. When he came home, he was quiet in a specific way. Not cold, not distant, but used up, every ounce of his concentration already spent. He would eat whatever she'd made, clean his plate, ask how her day had been. She would tell him. He would nod. She would ask about the project. He would describe it with technical precision she could not fully follow. Then they would watch something on television and go to bed. One evening she fell asleep on the couch, and he put a blanket over her without waking her. She woke at 2 in the morning to find the television off and the house still, and the blanket arranged neatly around her shoulders with the same careful consideration he gave to everything, and she lay there in the dark feeling something she could not name. Not gratitude, not resentment, but something situated uncomfortably between them. She texted Daniel that weekend about a reference she claimed to need for her research. He responded within 4 minutes. They texted for 2 hours. She deleted the thread before Thomas got home from his Saturday run. It meant nothing, she told herself. It was nothing. Just conversation. But she had made a choice when she pressed delete. And choices, even small ones made in quiet kitchens on Saturday afternoons, have weight. They accumulate. They become the architecture of something else entirely. And by the time you notice what you've built, you are already living inside it. That night, Thomas poured 2 glasses of wine and sat beside her on the couch and rested his hand on her knee. And she felt the warmth of it and said, quite genuinely, "I love you." And he said it back, and neither of them was lying. And somehow that was the most disturbing thing of all. Winter came and the light changed. Thomas noticed the way Anna's phone had migrated. From the kitchen counter where it used to sit face up, to her bag, to her cardigan pocket. Always within reach and always face down. He noticed the way she tilted the screen when she typed. He noticed these things in the detached observational way. He noticed everything. Cataloging, filing, not yet knowing what to do with the information. He was not, by nature, a suspicious man. Suspicion felt to him like a kind of vandalism against the life he had built, and he resisted it the way he resisted any structural instability, by assuming there was a rational explanation, by giving the benefit of the doubt, by trusting the foundation. But he began to pay attention in a different way. Not surveillance, not interrogation. He simply became more present in the evenings, more deliberate. He brought home wine on Wednesdays for no reason. He suggested they drive out on Sunday to the nature reserve she'd mentioned wanting to visit. She agreed to both things with a warmth that seemed entirely genuine and which, for a few days, made him feel foolish for his noticing. He told himself he'd been imagining things, that the lean years of long hours and missed dinners had made him anxious, had made him read distance where there was only tiredness. Then he heard her laugh from the bathroom. He was reading in bed on a Tuesday night when it came through the closed door. Not her social laugh, the performed one, the one she used at dinner parties, but the real one, the one that started low and caught her by surprise, the one he had not heard in a long time. He lay still with the book open on his chest and stared at the ceiling and did not move until she came out, already muffled in her robe, and said, "Sorry, I was on the phone with Diane," and got into bed and kissed him on the shoulder and turned out her light. He said, "How's Diane?" "She's fine, the usual." A brief pause. "She says hi. Tell her I said hi back." "I will." He knew Diane. They'd been friends since university, and Diane lived now in Edinburgh, and there was a time difference of 1 hour, and it was already 11:30, which would make it 12:30 in Edinburgh on a Tuesday, and Diane had 2 young children and a husband who worked early mornings. He did not say any of this. He lay in the dark and listened to Anna's breathing slow into sleep, and he thought about the laugh through the door, and he thought about the deleted texts. He had not gone looking, but he had seen the absence of threads, the clean, uncluttered message history that seemed at odds with how much his wife generally communicated. And he thought about the way she sometimes looked at her phone when she thought he wasn't watching, the involuntary softening around her eyes. The thought arrived not as an explosion, but as a quiet, sickening settling. The way ground shifts beneath a building during a minor earthquake. Nothing falls. No walls crack visibly, but everything inside you knows that something has moved. He did not confront her. Not yet. He was not a man who acted on incomplete information, and he understood, with the kind of clarity that feels like grief rather than relief, that there was more to learn, and that he needed to learn it without self-deception. He began to document. Not obsessively, not with any theatrical intent, but with the same methodical precision he brought to his work. Dates and small observations written briefly in a notes app that he password protected for the first time in his life. He photographed nothing. He read nothing she hadn't offered him. He simply waited, attentively, for the picture to complete itself. Anna, for her part, was not thinking of herself as a woman conducting an affair. She was thinking of herself as a woman who was finally being met, heard, reflected back, made to feel specific rather than general. Daniel asked about her inner life with a directness that felt almost reckless. He argued with her about art, passionately and without condescension. He made her feel, in a phrase she would never have admitted to Thomas, interesting. She told herself boundaries had not been crossed in any way that mattered. There was emotional closeness, yes, and there was physical nearness, a hand held briefly in a car park, a conversation that had lasted until midnight in her car outside a cafe. But she constructed careful definitions around these things and lived inside the definitions, and called them by softer names. She also, on a Wednesday evening in January, began to tell Daniel that Thomas didn't understand her. It started as complaint and became, in its retelling, indictment. Thomas was careful, but closed, reliable but remote. He never asked what she needed. He anticipated what he thought she needed and provided it, without checking. She believed all of this, and it was not entirely untrue, and the fact that it was not entirely untrue made it far more dangerous than any lie. What she did not say, because she could not yet see it, was that she had stopped telling Thomas what she needed, had stopped asking, had stopped leaning in, had begun instead to lean elsewhere, toward someone new enough to seem like a solution rather than a man with his own complications. She had simply not yet discovered. Thomas came home early one Friday in February to find a work email that needed a document from his home office. Anna's car was in the drive, which it often was on Fridays. He pulled in beside it. He went in through the front door, keys already in hand. He heard her voice first, low, unhurried, the specific cadence of a woman in a room she feels is private. He stood in the hallway, and in the space between the front door closing behind him and his next conscious thought, something shifted permanently, not loudly, not violently, but with the irreversible finality of a bone that is quietly snapped under load. The sitting room door was half open. Thomas stood in the hallway and saw them before they saw him. They were not in an embrace. They were seated close together on the couch, Anna leaning in, Daniel with his arms stretched along the back. Their faces turned toward each other in the easy, unguarded way of people who have long since stopped measuring distance. It was the specific intimacy of two people who have been meeting in private for months. It was the look of a secret that believes it is safe. Anna saw him first. The color left her face. Daniel turned. He was a large man, unhurried by nature, and he processed the situation with something Thomas would later recognize as contempt, dressed as amusement. A slight settling of his shoulders, a fractional shift in his expression, as if the presence of the husband were simply a logistical inconvenience. A minor variable. Tom, Anna said. Just that, just his name, 2 letters shorter than it actually was. She only ever called him Tom when she needed something to land softly. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel. You should go, he said to Daniel. Quiet even, without any particular edge. Daniel did not move immediately. There was a pause, deliberate, Thomas thought. And then Daniel said, with the particular relaxation of a man who has decided he is in a position to be relaxed, I think Anna can decide who should and shouldn't be here. Anna said, Daniel. No, Daniel said, not unkindly, as if correcting a minor misunderstanding. He should know where he stands. You've been telling me for months what this marriage is. He should know that you… Stop, Anna said sharply now. Stop talking. Daniel looked between them. For the first time, he seemed to read something in Anna's face that did not match what he had been told, and a small uncertainty moved across his expression, quickly covered. Thomas said nothing. He had stopped looking at Daniel. He was looking at his wife, at the careful architecture of her shame, the ways she was trying to find a version of herself to occupy. And he felt something that surprised him, not rage, not even hatred, but a vast and terrible sadness. The kind that has weight, that sits in the chest like water. Daniel stood eventually. He picked up his jacket. As he passed Thomas in the narrow hallway, he paused. Another deliberate pause, another small performance, and said, She told me you don't see her, that you've never really seen her. He said it almost gently, as if delivering news. Thomas looked at him. Let the silence stretch, then said, You should leave now. And something in his stillness, not aggression but a quality of absolute certainty, of a man who knows precisely how much ground he stands on, made Daniel leave without another word. The door closed. Thomas went to the kitchen and filled a glass with water and drank it standing at the sink. He heard Anna follow him in. He could feel her behind him, waiting. He turned around. She started to speak. Thomas, I know how. Don't, he said. Not harshly. Just precisely. Not right now. She stopped. Her eyes had gone bright and wet, and he could see her looking for the version of this scene that could be managed. The script that had worked before. The tears. The context. The gradual repositioning. He had watched her do it, he realized, many times. The small readjustments. He had always allowed them because he had wanted to believe in the readjustments. I need to know how long, he said. She told him. 4 months, she said, and immediately qualified it. Nothing fully physical. Not really. They hadn't. She found herself listing categories and degrees, drawing maps of what had and hadn't technically occurred. And he watched her do this with a kind of exhausted recognition. The borders she was drawing were real to her. He understood that, and it changed to nothing. He asked her one more question. Did you love him? She opened her mouth, closed it, said, finally, I didn't let myself think about it that way. He nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long time. I'm going to stay at Jeff's tonight, he said. Jeff was his older brother, 15 minutes away, a calm man who asked very little. I need you to be honest with yourself about what you want. Not what you want to say to me to fix this. What you actually want? She said very quietly. I don't want to lose you. He said, I know. And there was no comfort in it, no reassurance, just acknowledgement, just the honest receipt of what she'd said. Then he went upstairs and packed a bag with the careful efficiency of someone who has been taught to think through every step. He came back down, picked up his keys, and said, from the doorway, lock the door behind me. He drove to his brother's house and sat in the car in the dark driveway for a long time before going in. What he felt was not what the stories promised you would feel. There was no clarity, no cleansing anger, no righteous momentum. There was only the specific ache of a man who has discovered that the floor he trusted has been hollow for a long time, and that he is not sure, even now, how much of the hollowing he himself had failed to prevent. He did not cry. He sat and was present with what was real. And then he got out of the car and rang his brother's bell. By March, Thomas had moved into a furnished apartment on Crane Street near the firm. It was clean and anonymous, and he made it livable with small, deliberate choices. A good lamp, decent coffee, the particular silence of a space that belonged entirely to him. He retained his solicitor, not to punish, but because he understood that the bureaucracy of separation required order, and he was good at order. He communicated with Anna through measured, polite messages about logistics, the joint account, the car insurance, her name on the utility bills. And she responded to all of these with a quiet compliance that told him she was trying to demonstrate something. She called twice. He answered both times and kept the conversation short and practical. He was not cold. Coldness would have required more effort than he had to spare. He was simply occupying the decision he had made. His colleagues noticed nothing, which was both an achievement and a small indictment. He worked long hours, which he had always done, and he went for runs in the early mornings, and he ate well enough. And on Friday evenings, he had dinner at Jeff and Pam's house and let himself be looked after in the undemanding way that only family provides. Jeff never asked him to explain himself. This was the most valuable thing anyone gave him that spring. Daniel Foss, Thomas would learn through a colleague of Anna's who had no idea she was delivering news, had returned to his previous institution in Bristol by April. He had apparently had a conversation with Anna in late February. Thomas did not know the details, had not asked, would not, and that conversation had ended whatever shape they had assigned to themselves. Thomas felt nothing specific when he heard this. Not satisfaction. Only a kind of distant noting. The way you note weather. Anna, meanwhile, was learning what it felt like to have made a choice whose full weight reveals itself gradually. She had expected, in the immediate aftermath, that the worst of it would be the separation from Thomas, and it was bad. The absence of him, of his particular presence in the house, the way everything structural and reliable had simply withdrawn, was disorienting in ways she hadn't anticipated. But what she had not expected was the quality of the loneliness that followed once Daniel was also gone. Once the version of herself she'd been performing for him had no audience, she had told Daniel that Thomas didn't see her, that he was closed, remote, carefully attentive in ways that missed the actual point. There was truth in this. She held on to the truth of it, but she had also begun, in the slow accounting that grief requires, to examine the parts she had edited out of that version, the ways she had stopped communicating what she needed long before she had any reason to, the way she had cultivated the grievance, watered it quietly in private until it grew large enough to justify the actions she had already half decided on. She didn't arrive at these realizations cleanly or quickly. They came in pieces, at inconvenient times, while she was teaching or driving or standing in the grocery aisle holding something she hadn't meant to pick up. She called Thomas on a Sunday in May. He answered. I'd like to have coffee, she said, not to negotiate anything. I think I owe you a real conversation, not excuses. He said he'd think about it. She heard, in that pause, the thing she had not fully believed until now. That he had genuinely moved somewhere she could no longer easily reach, not away from her in anger, but away from her in the quieter, more final way of a man who has integrated his grief and continued walking. They met at a cafe on Merchant Street on a Thursday morning in June, neutral ground, midway between their separate lives. He was already there when she arrived, with coffee ordered and a glass of water on her side of the table, which made her throat tighten in a way she had not prepared for. She had rehearsed, not a speech. She knew better than to arrive with a speech, but a kind of emotional preparation, a sense of what she wanted to say and what she could realistically hope to hear. She wanted him to know she was sorry. She wanted him to understand she had not stopped loving him. She wanted, if she was honest, some version of the door being left slightly open. She sat down. He looked well, tired in the eyes but settled, the way people look when they have made peace with something difficult. He had lost a little weight. He had always been lean. She noticed his hands around the coffee cup, familiar, precise, still. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course." A pause. She looked at the table. "I'm not going to ask you to come back," she said. "I want you to know that's not what this is." He nodded, waited. "I've been thinking about what I told Daniel. About you." She looked up. "That you didn't see me, and I've been trying to be honest about how much of that was true and how much of it was something I needed to believe, so that I could justify what I was already doing." He didn't speak. "I think some of it was true," she said. "And I think I never told you. I just let it calcify. And then when someone offered me something different, I mistook the difference for the thing I'd been missing." He was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved slightly against the ceramic of the cup. "I know I made you feel unseen," he said finally. "I've thought about that a lot. I think I believed that being reliable was enough to communicate love, that if I showed up consistently, fixed things, provided things, paid attention in the ways I knew how, that it would be received as what it was." A pause. "I think I was wrong about that." "You weren't wrong about all of it." "No," he said, "but enough of it." She looked at him for a long moment. There was so much still between them. The specific depth of 9 years, the vocabulary of a life shared, the hundreds of private references that don't survive the people who made them. She could feel the pull of it. She suspected he could too. "Is there any?" She stopped. Tried again. "Is there any version of this where?" "Anna." Gently. Just her name. She understood. She nodded slowly, pressing her lips together. She would not cry here. She had decided that. She picked up the water glass and held it for a moment without drinking. "I'm glad you're okay," she said. "You look like yourself." "I am," he said. "I think I actually am." They sat for a while longer. They talked about small things. Her book, which she was still writing, his project, which was finishing, the house, which she was thinking of renting out. The conversation had the texture of two people handling something fragile with great care, which was, in its way, more intimate than anything they had managed in the last 2 years of their marriage. When they stood to leave, she hugged him briefly. His hand came up to her shoulder blade for just a moment, the old gesture, and then it was done. She walked to the door. He paid the bill. She looked back once, from the doorway, and he was putting on his jacket, head down, unhurried. She walked out into the June light. There's a particular kind of ending that doesn't announce itself. No closing door, no final word, no moment designed to be remembered. Just two people who loved each other arriving, finally, at an honest understanding of what they were, what they brought, and what they withheld, and what the distance between those things eventually cost. Thomas Elliot Varden drove back to Cream Street and made himself lunch and stood at the window of his clean, anonymous apartment, and felt something that was not happiness but was clear. Anna Celine Varden sat in her car in the cafe car park for a long time, keys in her hand, watching the ordinary life of the street move past the windows. She thought about the blanket he had put over her shoulders while she slept. She thought about the way she had poured his coffee down the sink every morning for years rather than simply telling him it was too strong. Small things. How much had been contained in the small things? The light shifted. She started the car and drove home through the city, and the summer moved around her, full of people who were making choices they did not yet know the weight of.